I just wanted to go over a little bit of a sort of a map of some of the things that we'll cover today. And I think the first is talking a little bit about kind of the importance of extracurriculars, but also a little bit about how it's evaluated from an admissions officer perspective. And I'll be injecting a little bit of that into the presentation itself. The second point here is going to occupy, I'd say, the majority of the content today. And that's, I've pulled together 5 core factors towards the effective planning of an extracurricular plan. And I'll walk you through those step by step. And then we'll talk a bit about kind of using the summer to maximize those plans. That will be interspersed throughout because there are periods of 10 weeks in which you've got a lot of freedom and flexibility. And so students that are highly successful are able to really take many of those skills, passions, and interests that they've begun developing throughout the year and take them to the next level during the summer. And then, of course, as Rebecca mentioned, Alex and Sim will share a little bit about some of the work that they've been able to do. Next slide. Oh, perfect. So one of the things that I really did want to kind of start off with, and I think is something that is perhaps a little bit underappreciated, is essentially understanding exactly what extracurricular activities are. And so last night was actually the first night of the extracurricular planning sprint that I'm leading with Kyros members. And we had a really amazing description. And students were able to really pin down exactly what an extracurricular is. In fact, a number of students said, it's anything that you do outside of school that's not considered schoolwork, that's related to your interests, activities, hobbies, and goals. But then every single example they gave was DECA, HOSA, debate, Model UN. So really formal organizational activities that are planned through their high school. And no one really mentioned things like baking, cooking, volunteering with a nonprofit organization, running a blog, starting your own podcast. And so I think sometimes while people might understand in concept what extracurriculars are, they don't really fully understand that they are truly anything that you spend your time doing outside of the classroom. And so I think when I talk about extracurricular activities, I like to classify them into 2 separate kinds of opportunities. The first are what I call classical, and those are things that would be available throughout your high school or organized activities in your local community. So those HOSA, debate, DECA, things that you can just sign up for at your local high school. And then the trickier, harder to pin down concept are entrepreneurial types of activities. They're ones that you're really making, pursuing, or sometimes even fully creating entirely on your own, in the same way that an entrepreneur would approach. Next slide. So these are a couple of really interesting examples of extracurricular activities of students that I've either worked with or I've read about while I was working at MIT. And I think the first one is kind of interesting. It was a student that was just kind of interested in woodworking, and they built canoes in their basement, and they were really beautiful and interesting. And that student was admitted to MIT in part because woodworking is an underappreciated area of making. And they'd put so much time and energy into crafting these really beautiful things that they sold for charity in their local community. The second one is probably one of the most delicious that I've seen, but it's a student who noticed that there was a shortage of traditional Chinese food in their Midwestern city. And so what they did was they partnered with a local chef who was an elderly woman who was looking to make some extra income. And they made, sold, and distributed yao xiao. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that exactly right, but it's sort of a Chinese style fried dough. And the student was able to make annual profits of about $50,000 a year by the end of their high school career. Another student that I worked with was really into kind of photography and really interested in cultural exchanges. And so what they did is they would spend the summer for 3 summers in a row in different cities in Mexico, practicing their Spanish, but also taking really beautiful photos of cultural attractions, people, and amenities. And they converted that into a blog in which they showcased their travels and their photography. And then the final one is probably my favorite because I tend to like birds, but it's a student who spent a lot of time and energy getting certified in handling predatory birds. And they went on to become the only high school aged volunteer at the Audubon Bird Sanctuary that could handle eagles, hawks, and owls. And so I think these are really things that are kind of non-traditional. And what's really unique about them is they give students the opportunity to pursue the things they love doing at a high level. But it's something that's a little bit more unusual. And because there's a smaller number of people doing these things, it makes it a lot easier to stand out in that process. Next slide. And these extracurriculars are incredibly important, and for a variety of reasons. I think the first is that they give students an opportunity to explore their interests and their passions. Those can be academic, they could be professional, or they could be more hobby related. But extracurriculars are essentially giving you the opportunity to do the things you love or determine what career paths it is. And I shared this story yesterday in my ECA sprint, and everyone thought it was really funny, but I actually completed all of my med school requirements and undergraduate and was planning to take the MCAT and apply to med school. And I got the privilege of sitting in on an open heart surgery, and I fainted in the OR. And realized very quickly that medicine was not the right path for me. And that's something that I wish I had explored a lot earlier in my career. I think the second one is one that's a little bit less appreciated, but is incredibly important, is that extracurricular opportunities provide you a canvas to begin exercising and practicing a number of really important non-cognitive communication, leadership, relationship building skills that are important and essential for the rest of your life. Because we are going to have to work in teams. We're going to have to exercise leadership abilities. We need to communicate complex concepts. And I think that these soft skills that are really essential for success are great byproducts of extracurricular activities. And then the third, and the one that's probably of the most interest to a lot of people here, is that colleges use extracurricular activities as a proxy for your values, for your passions, and for the things you contribute to your campus. Rebecca mentioned that colleges are receiving a huge number of highly qualified applicants. So when I was a reader at MIT, I was reading about 3,700 applications per year, but I was only passing on about 20 in-depth comprehensive read. While probably 80% of the applicants I read had the academic qualifications to be at a place like MIT, they were all fairly similar in the things they were offering the admissions office. And so those 25% that I was selecting from the bundle to pass on for a deeper read were ones that really caught our eye and had an area of contribution or a hook. Most oftentimes, I think, crafted and built through their extracurricular profile. Next slide. And there's a real big distinction that I kind of want to draw here. And there are generally two kinds of students. This is a real generalization because there's, I'd say, more of a spectrum with students who fall all the way in between. But for simplicity's sake, I would say students tend to be generalist, which means they do a little bit of everything, kind of investing a little bit of time in many things. I think we all know the student. Maybe they do a sport, they're on student council, they play the flute, maybe they volunteer at the homeless shelter. They're doing a lot of things, but there's not a whole lot of consistency or a lot of time and energy that are devoted to any one of those things. And then I think we also know the opposite end of the spectrum, who are the specialists, the students that really have determined one thing and one thing only that they love, and they're investing a ton of time and energy. And I think that that doesn't necessarily mean students only doing one extracurricular activity, but they've identified something that's important to them, and they're finding ways to explore or enhance their abilities within that area through lots of different things that they might be doing. Next slide. And I think when it comes to kind of the extracurricular planning, so it's really great to understand what extracurriculars are, why they're important. But essentially, as you're kind of creating an extracurricular plan for yourself throughout the year or throughout high school, I think that there is a basic human confirmation bias where we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in short periods of time and then underestimate what we're really capable of achieving in a long time frame. And so this is Gates' law. It was stated by Bill Gates, but it's sort of a permutation of a famous computer scientist from Stanford's quote. But essentially, I think What I really like to kind of point to here is that if you plan for the long term and really set aside time to accomplish goals, you can accomplish some pretty incredible things. And I think a really awesome metaphor for this is investment. So for those of you students in the audience, and probably most parents are familiar with the concept of compound interest. If you invest a dollar when you're younger, by the time you retire, it is estimated to be worth $1,000 and sometimes more. And I think that that really applies to taking some time and energy to create a plan, and devoting small amounts of time consistently, almost daily, to some of the things you love. By the end of high school, by the end of college, you'll see that those investments are really paying off dividends. And so when I talk to students about kind of creating a plan of action and creating their extracurricular plan for the year and for the next few years, these are kind of the 5 steps that I ask them to really go through as they're thinking about what they want to do and how they're going to do it. And so we're going to walk through each of them.